Hey, by the days. Yo, I don't know why I'm looking washed today. Hello, everyone. Cultured Khun here. So, today, welcome back to your biblical series. Today, we are talking about when the Bible was written. So, now it is believed that the first sightings, the first writings, the first creations, the first amalgamations, the first collections and the gathering of this information started 7th century BC, and then it finished 7th century AD. So roughly, we are covering quite a few years of history. Some believe that in the Bible, the canon itself contains 400 years. Others believe it contains 4,000 years. The book itself has existed roughly about 2,000 years, but the collection started 4,000 years ago. So cast your mind back 2,600 years ago with me, and we're going to the capital city of Nineveh, and we're in the Assyrian Empire. And this is the time period in which the first collections of canon were believed to have been done. So we are now in the Assyrian Empire. We are in northern Iraq, southeast Turkey, northwestern Iran, and northeastern Syria. And right now, we are in Nineveh. We've got city walls spanning 12,000 kilometers, encompassing an area of 750 hectares, roughly 1,870 football fields. So that's in it. And here we have a warrior class of men. We've got traders, we've got vital land, we've got wheat, we've got barley being grown. We brew, we write, we have artisans, we have artists, we have architects, we have warriors, we have traders, we have blacksmiths, and we have a very strong army and a proud presence of ourselves. We had initially existed as a city-state in 21st century BCE, before Common Era, before Christ era. Then we existed as a territorial state. City-state means we were an independent city, independent for its legislative, administrative, and financial function. Territorial means we had expanded in our region. This 14 BCE. In 7 BCE, we had then expanded into an empire because we had started to encompass more land. We had started to get into more territories. We had raped, pillaged, and taken from enough people at that point. And this is the starting point of the collection of data on the Bible as you now have it. We have the Pentateuch, 5 scrolls written by Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And these were all gathered, or at least started being gathered in that time period. In the end, it's 7 AD. By this point, we have had the introduction of the Julian calendar from Caesar and the Roman Empire, but we are not there yet, historically speaking. So now, why are we talking history? Why am I trying to contextualize the content? The reason is context is the code to break the content. Context is the code to break the content. So a lot of people believe that there is a cipher to the Bible, and there is. And the cipher is historicity. The cipher is sociology. The cipher is psychology. And if you look at chronology, which means time, study of time, chronos, time, ology, study of. So if we study time and we study data points and we pick points for which we focus on, we can then pinpoint and coordinate ourselves to an understanding, to a comprehension of the canon. So we started with the Assyrian Empire. We then had the fall of the Assyrians to Babylon, the Babylonian Empire, and there's mention of the Bible, Tower of Babel, and wonders of the world. And these societies were rich in culture, rich in diversity, and they were unique. Each culture had its own emblem. So with the Assyrians, they had their chariots and their metalworks, and they went to war with iron, whereas their opponents came to war with bronze. The Babylonians had then challenged from southern Mesopotamia. Mesos means middle, Potamos, river, so middle of the Indus River, and what's the other? And Euphrates, I think. You track the geology or the geography for me. With that point being said, we have the rise and fall of various empires over the course of the biblical canon, over the course of the canonical texts. And we start in Genesis, and we have the rise and fall of, first of all, Mesopotamia, which is in the land mass in the middle of the two rivers. And it had vital land, it had fertile lands due to the river banks being flooded constantly. There was fresh produce often grown in these societies. And so in societies where fishing, farming, trade, commerce were common, they thrived and they enjoyed a great standard of life. There were trading posts every 10 to 20 kilometers along trade routes. There were lodgings, there was citizenship, there was protection, there was soldiers, there was a beautiful vibrance to the city and to the stories of many of these ancient empires that are made reference to in the Bible. Now, I want to teach this to you today. The Bible was written with didactic purpose, so it was written to teach. It wasn't written to be read as a history book. So if you're trying to chronicle events and you're trying to piece bits and pieces of it together, you'll get lost. Because I was telling my mom this earlier, Genesis 2 is actually older than Genesis 1. And the oldest book in the Bible is actually Thessalonians in terms of when it was written. It's just the reason why it was threaded together was to make sense of A, the narrative, and B, the direction in which the teachers wanted to channel the conversation, the comprehension of that conversation. So I can make reference to the empires. I can make reference to the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the ancient Egyptians, the Romans, the Greek. But what you must learn from these empires, from these empire states, from the culture, the color, the creed, and citizenship of these places, is that in their inference of information and intel from the data set they had, from the people, from the environment, from the architects around them and the architecture of their mental frame, is that they pulled threads that were available to them to string together stories, to push out the envelope of Christ and the understanding which they had come to via religious personal experience of the spirit and of the higher beings and lower beings. So when you read the Bible, and when you read it chronologically, canonically, whether you're reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, the four canonical texts, which were actually only came later in the story of Christianity, or if you read the books of the Old Testament and you're wondering why the tones are different, it's because the tones are indicative of the times, and the time shows the people they were writing to. So we've already made mention of who wrote the Bible, and with who wrote the Bible, we have to come to an understanding of where they came from. So people, places, things. So the people that were important to them, the places from which they came, and the things that they did with the people they came into contact with, and the places where they came from. Oh, sorry. Correct. So now let's dive a bit into the historicity of the nations, the kingdoms, and the states that were mentioned. So we've already time traveled to the Assyrians. We've already imagined ourselves in this colossus of a kingdom. We've seen the vast city-states. We've seen the soldiers, the warrior class. We've seen the blacksmiths. We've seen the donkeys. We've seen the mules. We've seen the fishing. We've seen the farming. We've seen the produce. We've seen the trade. We've seen the commerce. Then we've had revolt. And we've seen the Babylonians challenge the Assyrians, and they've fallen. And they came up with the Tower of Babel, that infamous tower, which it said God destroyed. A wonder of the world. Then, as we move through the Bible, we encounter the Egyptians. And the Egyptians are the people responsible for the growth and maturation of Moses. Moses, who is believed to have written the first 5 scrolls, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, the Torah, of the original content of the Hebrew Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. We have Moses. And Moses is known for Let My People Go. Egypt is known for kingship, power, monarchy, and their pharaoh system. And they believed in the sun god Ra. And they have stories of people like Osiris. And we have this movement across cultures. We've moved from Western Asia, we're now moving into Africa. And Africa has a significant story in the Bible, even though it's understated, I think, by many Christians, many Christian teachers, many Christian scholars. It's because in an effort to conscientize yourself, you have to deal with culture, and culture is ever changing, culture is always evolving, and it's a difficult thing to pinpoint at any particular time, periodically at least. So we have reference of, in the Northern Hemisphere, North Africa, Egypt, and we have cultural items being mentioned in the Bible. We have papyrus, we have hieroglyphics, we have soldiers, we have pharaohs, we have priestesses, high priestesses, we have princesses. And moving through, we have the Romans. So Paul, Apostle Paul, formerly Saul, who had converted to Damascus. You have to excuse me for skipping through 1,000 years of history. We know the Old Testament is the story of the Israelites and trying to get to Zion, and it's the story of their trial and tribulation and trying to establish and re-establish a covenant with God. First, they had established a covenant via being descendants of Adam, who broke it from taking part in the tree of knowledge. Then we have Moses, let my people go, 40 years, that they started worshiping Baal. Then we've had Adam, let me just be chronologically ordered. We have Adam, we have Cain, Abel, Seth, we have Noah, skip through, we have Moses, skip through, we have Abraham, Isaac, skip through, now into the New Testament. And this is 1,000 years of history, so you're going to have to excuse me and my wish-washy history buff here. So we go into the New Testament, and the New Testament chronicles the life of Jesus. He was raised a Jew, he associated with Jews, he walked, he talked, he believed as a Jew, he worshipped in Jewish spaces, in Jewish communes, in Jewish synagogues, and he was inducted into the religion of Judaism. It wasn't until his death when Christianity was born. So as you read the Bible, this is one history of the story. There isn't a single Christian in the Old Testament. That's a historical fact. And even in the New Testament, it is not until Christ dies and is then resurrected when Christianity is born. That is the canon event. And this is because Christ himself, Jesus Christ, Jesus the Nazarene, Christ the Anointed One, was a Jew. His mother was a Jew. His father was a Jew. Okay? And it was the Jews who, in council with Pontius Pilate, committed deicide. They killed God for claiming to be King of the Jews. Then death, resurrection, and we had the Pentecost event, and we had following subsequent events that colored the creed, which we now have Christianity, which we now have the Bible, compiled Christian Canon, correct? So, in reading with the history, one undertone we seem to miss is the Jewish influence on the Bible. Another undertone we seem to miss is the Asian influence on the Bible. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, they had invented writing. They had brought forth via Hammurabi and the Golden Circle many inventions which man used as instrumentation to infer information on the divine. And they connected with the immaterial via the instrumentation available to them. So if it was the Egyptians, via papyrus and hieroglyphics and art and architecture, they communicated with their gods, the sun god Ra in particular. And the Assyrians, the Babylonians, who had a belief in Ashur, the god Ashur. And these were henotheistic societies, so they had a claim to one god, but were accepting of polytheism. And then we also have the Greek influence following that in the New Testament. And the Greeks were believed to be artists, artisans, philosophers, thinkers, deep thinkers, engineers, and they lived life philosophically. We had the Romans who lived life militarily. So whenever you pick up on tones of aggression, tones of violence, tones of force, or tones of art, tones of culture, tones of poetry, tones of prose, tons of symbology, tons of sign. Be cognizant of people, place, and things. The person who's saying it, which people who they associated with, which people had raised them, the place in which those things were being said, the place that person came from. Because the environment is the architect of the mind. And if you don't change your environment will change you. And the things, the cultural items, the things that are symbolic to the people and the places that thing is being said come from. Okay? So we've learnt today that there's 5 main kingdoms which color the code in the creed of Christians, the Bible. We've learnt about the Assyrians who fell to the Babylonians. We've learnt about the Egyptians who fell according to their own accord. We've also learnt about the Romans and the Greeks who've had their equal influence on the Bible. Correct. And with that being said, as we dive deeper into this biblical series, and as you provide feedback with me as far as how these lessons are helping you understand the text which you're faced with every Sunday or every day, provided you subscribe to a Bible plan, allow yourselves to be embedded with the information coming from these videos. But more importantly, as this series sits and simmers on your mind, please feedback either what you like, what you dislike, what I could do better, and anything you'd be interested in learning, because I'm also learning in this process. I've spoken briefly about the empires which feature in the Bible, and I've spoken briefly about 7th century BCE to 7 AD, roughly the period covering whether it's 400 or 4,000 years, depending on which scholar you ask, contained in the Bible. And I've condensed it because, like the Bible itself, it's condensed, and I wanted to draw from the examples of history. I wanted to draw from the context and the pretext and the subtext so that I can unlock your mind in understanding what may seem to you unintelligible about the Bible. You know, there's people who, I'll raise this example. There's conversation about LGBTQPAI plus community, and there's people who reference Leviticus or they reference Deuteronomy, and they cherry pick Bible verses, but are not cognizant of the culture in which that content was written, was recorded. It's because they have lacked the data point, and it's no fault of their own. I mean, anyone can cherry pick any source of information. But one, the Bible, as we've mentioned before, is a book of books. It's a library, 66 books. So if you pick on a book, i.e. Leviticus, you pick on one of the 5 main books which form the Torah. You pick on one of the 5 main books which has the mitzvot, the 365 mitzvot. You pick on one of the 5 books which we call the Pentateuch, the 5 scrolls written by Moses. Let's talk about people, place, things. Let's talk about the cultural items that are associated with Moses. Let's talk about the cultural items associated with language, with learning, with the cognition, with art, with architecture. Let's talk about the context which supports the content, which is encoded for consensus, for understanding and conversation. You know, so when you cherry pick a Bible verse, know that every line on the Bible is loaded. 1. 2, know that there are many literary devices in play, i.e. hyperbole, embellishment, allegory, anecdote. And when you choose to analyze, when you choose to redact, when you choose to criticize, be cognizant of all these devices before you make a fool of yourself. So verses like that, where it speaks on homosexuality, where it speaks on Sodom and Gomorrah, where it speaks on the Great Flood, when it speaks on looking back and turning to a pillar of salt. These are stories written with didactic reasoning to teach the person reading, whether it be in self-study or be it through lecturing, the way I am talking to you now, that those are cultural items synonymous with people, places, and things occurring at the time of that record written. Now, prior to this, the Bible, at least information or stories concerning the Bible, concerning the biblical narrative, concerning religion, were passed on orally. So you had oracles who understood these symbols, these signs, and taught. You had priests moving at homes, preaching in marketplaces, preaching in worship spaces, preaching in business places, preaching in centers of information, centers of influence. And they told a story. They told a story to incite interest. They told a story to intrigue an audience. They told a story to grab attention, and not only to capitalize on that attention, but to captivate and hold prisoner that attention so that they could pump in their agenda, they could push their philosophy, and they push that information. So I hope you haven't been lost in my words. I hope I haven't drowned any of you too much. But I'm going to cut this here. I'm going to end it. The next video, I want to talk about why the Bible was written. I've briefly mentioned it as I've come to bring this video to a close. But I think it is important for us to realize and recognize the value, or at least the truth value, of the writing, the reading, and the preaching of such text. Please forgive me for the poor lighting. I was a bit tired today and doing the research, trying to prep this lesson. I had lost markers for this. So next lesson, I think I'll be able to track my thoughts on a whiteboard. At least that would help me cut down the video length, also help me be a bit more clear and concise so that you guys can easily comprehend and watch back. Also, put down in the comments if you'd like timestamps about certain periods I talk about, whether it was, again, Assyrians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Romans, and Greeks. And if you need me to go in depth more, which I will in subsequent videos, I always like to visit back, so at least my content has some sense of internal cohesion. But as I do come to visit some of the values and the teachings I've preached today, I will obviously adjust according to the audience. So yeah, thank you guys again for listening. Thank you guys again for giving me your attention, giving me your time. And please, if you'd be so kind, could you give me some feedback? Kind of hanging to dry for here, but yeah, anyway. Cultured Khun out. Good night, God bless.